Right, so this weekend has been full of news about another Tory defection to Labour. Keir Starmer once again throwing his arms open wide to welcome another rancid right-wing Tory to his Labour Party. They do seem to be such a good fit these days after all. No checks, no nothing, just straight no matter what they might have said or what they might have done or indeed what they voted on in the past. They're in. Where left-wingers failed to get selected for Labour for liking the Foo Fighters, for instance, or once upon a time liking a tweet by the Green Party. Being a Tory, well, apparently that doesn't preclude you in any way, shape or form from joining his Labour Party as an MP. But there's another less spoken about angle to this, and that is the Israeli ties that this Tory MP has, that perhaps earned him his free pass in the Party of Zionist without qualification Keir Starmer. So by all means, let's talk about newly minted Labour MP, the Tory defector Dr Dan Poulter, whose politics in no small part make him a good fit for what is now a Tory B Team, but also a party likely more pro-Israel than the one he just left. Right, so Tory MP for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, Dr Dan Poulter, has defected to Starmer's Labour. And exactly as happened when Christian Wakeford defected to Labour from the Tories a couple of years ago, Keir Starmer has opened his arms wide, crowed to high heaven about this being such a coup. But even Tories are now choosing Labour, as if this is some kind of great win, when actually it should horrify naturally Labour voting members of the public, not to mention those members of the party who actually care what the party stands for, and not just about winning for the sake of winning, as seems to be Starmer's sole strategy. Because if Labour is now the party welcoming Tories, then it's a Tory party, it's not a Labour one. Starmer, of course, not quite knowing what he'll do in power when he gets there, but his ambition, as we already know, far surpasses any political ability that he might have. If Tories are welcoming the Labour Party, then it is no longer the Labour Party. End of story. Find someone else to vote for. This should be obvious. Starmer even went as far as issuing a statement on this, saying, "It's fantastic to welcome Dr Dan Poulter to today's changed Labour Party. My party is back in the service of working people. Our mission is to grow the economy and rebuild our public services. I'm delighted that Dan will be helping us get the NHS back on its feet. Across the country, more and more people are switching to Labour because they know only this changed Labour Party can deliver the change Britain needs. It's time to end the Conservative chaos, turn the page and get Britain's future back. I'm delighted that Dan has decided to join us on this journey." Now, I appreciate that might get some people's blood pressure boiling. The immediate response to that being one of, "You've written about Tory chaos there, sunshine, when you've literally just welcomed one of them into your ranks, no ifs, no buts, no equivocation. Not to mention the changed party has been changed into the Tory Party B Team. The plan to grow the economy is built on zero investment, apparently, and the NHS getting back on its feet, it seems, means more privatisation." Making this statement even more pointless and vapid, the brazen politicisation of this move is the fact that Poulter, despite defecting, is still going to stand down at the next general election. It's not like he's jumped ship because he thinks he's losing his seat, though this is the natural conclusion many people will certainly jump to, such as what most people think of the Tories. But it shows Starmer has damaged his reputation in the eyes of Labour voters for nothing more really than a one-day headline. What's the point? Well, he continues to chase Tory voters. That seems to be the only point. They're the only voters that matter to him, apparently. His natural long-time supporting voters he expects to stay whatever he does. The Mandelson mantra, they'll stay because they've got nowhere else to go. It's not necessarily true. All in favour of pulling in disaffected Tories who might back him now, but might not in the future. There's no loyalty there, is there? But there's also the small matter of Poulter being subject to a misconduct probe into inappropriate behaviour with women 6 years ago that hasn't seemingly precluded him at all from being auto-welcomed into the Parliamentary Labour Party either. And you've got to take that in context of Diane Abbott, of course, remaining suspended after a whole year for doing nothing more than sending the wrong copy of a letter to a newspaper. Starmer's a political pygmy. We can see what he's up to because he's not clever enough to hide it. But that's nothing most of us don't already know either. And actually, there could be more to this, as I alluded to in my intro, which I'll come on to in a moment. Now, Dan Poulter has, of course, made his excuses for leaving the Tories, and he's citing the NHS for this and what they are doing to it. But you've got to remember, he's been a Tory MP since 2010, 14 years now. He therefore saw the Lansley health reforms introduced, the single most damaging assault on our NHS ever, as competition on steroids got introduced. Already had been going on under the previous Labour government, as we know, and the John Major government before that, when stuff like PFI got introduced, which of course Tony Blair ran with, and Andrew Lansley picked up the baton when the Tories got back into power and saw even more health services outsourced to private companies. And this is why we have a poorer health service, despite so much more money being put into the service, as right-wing media mouthpieces love to point out. But when more of it is going into the pockets of shareholders of those same outsourcing companies, it doesn't tell the story of how much money is actually getting used in the health service to deliver that service as we might believe it is. This is a guy who resigned from the British Medical Association, the doctors' trade union, in 2012 when they voted to strike over reforms, because he didn't believe doctors should ever go on strike. And here he is now with that mantra, that belief, going into Labour, the party supposedly of the trade union movement. It shows how far Labour has fallen. Why are trade unions still funding it, I wonder? They shouldn't have to go on strike, Dan, these doctors. That's the truth of it. You were part of the government at that point that drove them to do so. But now, after 14 years as an MP, Tory MP, seeing the damage to the NHS's now former party had done throughout all of that time, he has now decided that now the Tories are a danger to the NHS, and thinks Labour would be better. Therefore, he's joined them for however long is left before the general election. Has he ever met Wes Streeting, I wonder, if he thinks Labour's better? Streeting is, of course, Starmer's weasel of a shadow health secretary, and he's been creaming his pants at the thought of more outsourcing, more involvement of the private health sector, even though it has no capacity to pick up the slack and the destruction the Tories have wrought on it. Everything Poulter has previously supported, of course. In fact, Streeting's tweeted out a response to Poulter's defection, making me wonder if he's actually ever met Dr Dan in turn. As Streeting said, "Proud to welcome Dr Dan Poulter MP to the Labour Party. As a frontline clinician, he's seen the damage that 14 years of Conservative government has done to our NHS. Delighted to have his support and look forward to working with him, especially on mental health reform." Well, you might want to look at his voting record before you clap him and welcome his aid in fixing the NHS then, you absolute weapon of a man. But then there's actually a couple of reasons that roll into one concerning Dr Dan Poulter, and why Wes Streeting, the NHS privatiser wannabe and indeed Israel fanboy too, might just be a little bit excited about him joining Labour at this point. And with Labour wanting more private sector investment, that might pay off for Dr Dan too. So is this more of the reason he's defected now? Back in 2021, Poulter became a non-executive director of a company group called KernowDamo. Now, Poulter, as it happens, is a psychiatrist, hence Streeting's mention of mental health a moment ago. That is his field of medicine. So joining KernowDamo, which is a medicinal cannabis company, knowing the psychological effects of cannabis use, be this medicinal use or not, is an interesting one then. But even more interesting is the fact that KernowDamo are based in Israel. It's an Israeli company. Yes, one of them involved in our NHS. So is this as much a part of the reason he's been welcomed into Labour, as vociferously pro-Israel as clearly he is, by virtue of working with them then? It's not the only example of his pro-Israeli leanings either. It has to be said that Poulter resigned from KernowDamo just over a year ago now, according to Companies House. However, combined with alleged links to the likes of the Jewish Chronicle, whose funding, of course, is disturbingly mysterious and lobbying for Israeli interests, certainly for a good 2 years he had business links in that regard to KernowDamo, during which time you presume he must have been lobbying. Why else do politicians take up these directorships, be they executive or non-executive after all? So there might be even more to his pro-Israel proclivities than at first look. The question this brings to my mind is, given how pro-Israel Keir Starmer's Labour is, did this preclude any skeletons in Poulter's closet, from the NHS policy he was part of making, former health minister as he was, to those Israel links? And again, it begs questions about what sort of government this change for anything but the better Labour Party has for government going forwards. We know Poulter won't be part of it, at least not in Parliament, but behind the scenes, who knows what he'll be up to. So this story right now is just one of embarrassment for the Tories and nothing more. But it should worry those backing Labour too. It should be making you think. And if the NHS and Labour are potentially continuing the destruction of it where the Tories leave off hasn't got you thinking, perhaps a U-turn on cleaning up our water and rivers will, instead of cleaning up. Starmer's changed Labour, after all, having just voted with the Tories to weaken the powers of our already weak water company watchdog Ofwat, so that they have to allow these polluters to prioritise profits over handing out fines to them for doing so. That economic growth Labour keep bleating about, it seems they're determined to deliver it no matter what the cost, including the cost of stinking up our rivers even more than they already are. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.